Hello there everyone, welcome back to Press for Truth TV. Today is Wednesday, July the 11th, 2012, and the sovereignty of Canada is under attack in a big way today as the Beyond the Border plan, which was signed by Stephen Harper and Barack Obama, is beginning to implement some of its pilot projects in regards to cross-border policing, where we can now see American authorities here on Canadian territory in order to arrest criminals. Here's an article just out from the CBC today. Cross-border policing provokes sovereignty worries. When the Conservative government passed its controversial omnibus budget bill last month, it included new powers for certain U.S. law enforcement agents that critics say could have ramifications for Canadian sovereignty. The Integrated Cross-Border Law Enforcement Operations Act now makes it possible for American officers to cross the border into Canada, where, as the Act states, they have the same power to enforce an Act of Parliament as a member of the RCMP. This means they'll be armed and have the powers to arrest suspects in Canadian territory. For years, law enforcement agents without the authority to cross into neighboring waters have complained that suspected drug traffickers or smugglers could flee one country by boat and go to another to evade arrest. Officers from one country would have to stop at the border of the other. Well, yeah, that's the whole point of having borders. That's the whole point of having jurisdictions, so that we can maintain ourselves as an individual sovereign nation, and when there happens to be a criminal on Canadian soil, Canadians and Canadian law enforcement agencies should have the right and the ability to deal with that person in the way that we as Canadians have decided to enact our own laws. That's the whole point of keeping things, other officers out of others' jurisdictions, so that we can maintain our national sovereignty and conduct our own policing in the way that we as Canadians see fit. Now, small crews made up of Canadian and U.S. officers, specially designated and trained for cross-border policing, can go back and forth across the maritime border, all the while subject to the laws of the countries that they're in. There are conditions, however. The law, which focuses on combating cross-border crime on waterways shared by Canada and the U.S., pertains specifically to water-based operations. The crews consist of about 5 people at most in U.S. waters. A crew may include 4 U.S. Coast Guard officers and an RCMP officer patrolling on a small U.S. Coast Guard vessel. On the Canadian side, RCMP officers will be on a Canadian vessel with 1 U.S. Coast Guard officer. But this is a highly controversial integrated border enforcement program that jeopardizes Canadian sovereignty and potentially compromises the personal privacy of individual Canadians, wrote NDP MP Brian Massey, critic for Canada-US border issues. A program that cedes sovereignty, reduces privacy, and requires significant new investment must be fully debated and understood prior to its implementation. And that's a big part of the problem here, is that it is not understood. The majority of Canadians are not aware that this amounts to a complete takeover and a giving away by Harper and Obama of the national sovereignty of Canadians. I mean, a good way to put this is if, let's say, for example, the Americans wanted to invade Canada and this was happening, say, 100 years ago, it would come in the form of guns a-blazing and bayonets coming running over the hills, and Canadians would stand up and fight back in order to retain our country as an individual sovereign nation. The problem is that here in the 21st century, so many people are just too preoccupied with baseball games and Dancing with the Stars and going out and getting wasted and going to the clubs and all these sorts of things that they are just simply not aware that there is an incremental takeover of Canada happening right now. It is going on right under our very noses. We are seeing this bilateral union of the Canada and the U.S. taking place right now before our very eyes. But until enough Canadians wake up to this fact, it's most certainly just going to continue. And so the article goes on here. Land-based agreements are to come. Although the law deals with Canadian and U.S. waters, some are raising concerns that the next phase of the plan, a land-based version of the integrated policing, could be more problematic. And it goes on to say here, most people worry that you have a foreign law enforcement officer making arrests carrying a gun on Canadian territory. I think it becomes a little bit more difficult to control on land than it is on water, just by virtue of the fact that with water, you're in a boat and officers can't get too far away from one another. Government officials will only say that consultations are continuing with the possibility of pilot projects starting no earlier than in the fall. However, the current act does allow for American officers to come on Canadian soil in extreme situations, also known as the hot pursuit exception. If a person on a boat is suspected of committing a serious offense and now are trying to get away and they hit shore, U.S. officers are allowed to go on shore and pursue in those circumstances. If they're working in the Niagara-St. Catharines area, we don't expect to see them in downtown Toronto. It's under a very specific circumstance where everybody would expect, for public safety reasons, that the officer continue with the pursuit of an individual. But Kuhn said if a pursuit involved multiple suspects, it's possible that the RCMP officer could be separated from the U.S. officer. As far as how much time a U.S. officer can be on shore or how far inland, Kuhn says common sense prevails. Oh, yeah, well, that makes perfect sense. Let's just leave it up to common sense, you know, about how far inland these officers can come, how long they can stay on our shore. We'll just leave that to common sense. That sounds perfectly logical and reasonable to me. This is mind-boggling to me, really, that this is all happening under our noses and people don't seem to be taking any notice. I've been screaming from a high mountain for 7 years now. I remember back in 2005 when I used to tell people about this plan for a North American Union agenda. I was pretty much laughed at back then. But here we are beginning to see all of these things being dished out and implemented incrementally right before our very noses, and the majority of Canadians don't seem to be taking notice of this. So I think we're still at a point where it's crucial to raise awareness about the fact that national sovereignty is being eroded here in Canada. And we here at Press for Truth has spent a great deal of time and effort to expose this NAU agenda. A few years ago, we released our film, United We Fall, which you can see here, 3 Nations, 2 Sides, 1 Union, and we break down everything that is going on with this plan that we are seeing right now, where this is amounting to a bilateral union between Canada and the U.S. that will eventually include Mexico into these talks and deals, but for now the focus appears to be on a bilateral union. And so if you want to find out more about this NAU agenda and you haven't seen United We Fall yet, I'm going to put a link in the description to where you can see it on YouTube. You can watch the whole film, and if you want to get the DVD, I'll put a link in the description there as well. It's a great way to show your support for Press for Truth, and we have a lot of deleted scenes and the making of the music, and we have a director-producer commentary on this whole DVD. And of course, it's also available for Press for Truth TV members to download in high quality, so you can spread this information, hand it out to everybody, and just get the word out there that there is an incremental push right now to erode the national sovereignty of Canada. And so that's it for today, guys. Thanks for tuning in once again, and I will see you all right back here tomorrow at pressfortruth.tv. Take care.